We're leaving everything to your sister. My parents announced at my celebration dinner. Then they sued me for the beloved bookstore Grandma left me, demanding I pay them millions. But Grandma left one final secret. The smell is what I remember most about peace. It's the first thing that hits you when you walk into the story nook. A blend of old paper, leather bindings, and the dark, rich aroma of the coffee I grind fresh every morning. It's the smell of my sanctuary, my life's work, my last tangible connection to the only person who ever saw me without qualification, my grandmother, Grace. From my perch behind the oak counter, I have a clear view of the whole shop. The soft amber light from the banker's lamps gleams on the polished wooden floors. Dust motes dance in the sunbeams that slant through the large front window, illuminating the worn spines of books that have been loved by generations. This place is more than a business to me. It's a living, breathing entity, a fortress of quiet built by a woman whose love was my only shield. My sister, Chloe, never understood it. To her, the shop was just a collection of dusty objects, a relic from a bygone era. She preferred things that glittered, things that could be captured in a photo with a clever caption. "It's so quaint, Ava," she'd said once, wrinkling her nose as she perched on a stool, careful not to let her designer bag touch the floor. "But don't you ever want something more? Something shiny?" Our mother, Eleanor, encouraged this view. Her favorite mantra, one she'd polished over decades of use, was, "Chloe has the sparkle, Ava has the sense." She always said it with a sigh, as if my sensibility was a regrettable but necessary burden, while Chloe's sparkle was a gift to the world. It was never a compliment. I glanced over at the small digital frame on the corner of the counter, a gift from Grace years ago. A picture of her and me flashed onto the screen, our heads bent together over a complicated puzzle. Grandma Grace was old school, but she loved her tablet. She kept meticulous video diaries of her rose garden, narrating each bloom's progress with the serious focus of a botanist. "It's important to document things that matter, Ava," she told me, tapping the screen. "Memories are fragile. Sometimes you need to give them an anchor." At the time, I thought she was just talking about flowers. I was wrong. My family rarely visited the store. When they did, it was usually a prelude to a request. But they were always careful to maintain the facade of a tight-knit family to the outside world. My mother was the conductor of this orchestra of appearances. Her signature phrase, often delivered while patting my arm with a look of deep sincerity, was, "Whatever happens, Ava, remember we're a family. Family is all that matters." It was a statement that, over time, began to sound less like a comfort and more like a cage. The disparity between Chloe and me was never starker than during Grandma Grace's final years. Her illness was long and slow, a thief that stole her strength but never her spirit. I arranged my entire life around her needs. My days started before dawn, organizing her medications into little plastic boxes, and ended late at night, reading to her from her favorite poets until her breathing evened out in sleep. I learned the names of all her nurses, the rhythm of the machines that beeped softly in the background, the exact way she liked her tea. It was a quiet, thankless, and deeply sacred duty. I wouldn't have traded those moments for anything. Chloe's devotion was a different species entirely. It was loud, public, and fleeting. She would sweep into the sterile hospital room like a whirlwind of perfume and apologies, her phone already in hand. A quick selfie with Grace, carefully angled to hide the foredrip, would appear on her social media moments later. My brave grandma, soaking up every precious moment. The precious moment usually lasted 15 minutes, ending when she'd get a text or complain about the poor cell service. She never stayed for the hard parts. She never held the basin when Grace was sick, never changed the sheets, never sat through the long, silent hours when fear was a third person in the room. Once, after Chloe had made one of her whirlwind appearances, Grace patted my hand, her skin as thin and soft as tissue paper. "Some people mistake presents for presents, my dear," she whispered, her voice raspy. You give me your presents." Her eyes, though clouded with pain, were clear with understanding. In that moment, I felt seen in a way my own mother had never made me feel. After Grace passed, the will reading was a cold, formal affair. The lawyer's office was stuffy, smelling of old files and stale air. My mother and Chloe sat stiffly beside me, their grief wrapped in expensive black fabrics. Grace's modest savings were divided, but the main asset, her heart and soul, was addressed last. The lawyer cleared his throat. Regarding the property at 124 Main Street, known as the Story Nook, and the business contained therein, he read, Grace has bequeathed it, in its entirety, to her granddaughter, Ava Miller. A sharp, almost imperceptible intake of breath came from my mother. Chloe's perfectly manicured hand, which had been resting on my mother's arm, tightened. The lawyer continued, She also left a personal note for you, Ms. Miller. He slid a thick, cream-colored envelope across the polished table. Later, in the quiet of my small apartment, I opened it. Her familiar, elegant script filled the page. My dearest Ava, if you are reading this, it means my story has come to its final chapter. Don't be sad. It was a good story, and you were the best part of it. I leave you the Story Nook, not as a burden, but as a key. It was always your true home, the place where your soul could breathe. I leave it to you for a simple reason. You watered the garden while others only came to pick the flowers. You saw the whole story, not just the ending. You stayed. Love always, Grandma Grace. Tears I hadn't allowed myself to cry finally fell, splashing onto the precious ink. They were tears of profound gratitude, but also of a deep, isolating sorrow. Because as I folded the letter, I knew its contents had not been a gift to my family, but a judgment. The will hadn't just given me a bookstore, it had drawn a line in the sand, and my mother and sister were standing on the other side. At the small reception after the funeral, Chloe cornered me by the bland catering table. She forced a tight, brittle smile. Well, she said, spearing a melon ball with a plastic fork. At least someone got a whole business out of it. Some of us have to actually work for a living. My mother drifted over, placing a placating hand on Chloe's arm. Now, dear, she murmured before turning to me. Her eyes were cold, despite the sad smile on her lips. Your grandmother always had her favorites. I just hope you know what you're doing, Ava. A business like that, it's a big responsibility. And there it was. Not congratulations. Not comfort. A warning. A challenge. The cold rift that had been slowly forming in our family for years had just become a chasm. And I was standing on one side, clutching a letter and a set of keys, entirely alone. The years that followed the funeral were a quiet rebellion. I poured every ounce of my energy, my grief, and my love for Grace into the Story Nook. It was more than a business. It was an act of defiance. I installed a gleaming new espresso machine, its hiss and gurgle a modern heartbeat against the quiet rustle of pages. I started a weekly book club that quickly became the talk of the town, our discussions spilling out into the warm evenings. I launched a children's literacy program on Saturday mornings, filling the shop with the bright, chaotic energy of young readers. The Story Nook thrived. It became a community hub, a safe harbor. We were featured in the local paper, the headline reading, Historic Bookstore becomes town's living room. I framed the article and hung it behind the counter, a silent testament to Grace's faith in me. My success was quiet, but it was solid and real. And it was mine. This, of course, did not go unnoticed. Chloe's life, a curated feed of brunch spots, tropical vacations, and vapid motivational quotes, seemed to stall. Her influencer career hadn't taken off as planned, and her series of short-lived ventures, beaded jewelry, custom dog bandanas, had all fizzled out. The more the Story Nook flourished, the more a bitter, acidic envy began to seep from her pores. It started subtly. A string of anonymous one-star reviews appeared online. The owner is so unfriendly, one read. She acts like she's better than everyone else. Another one, however, was more specific. Used to be a nice family place until the current owner took over. Some people have no shame. The phrasing was careless, but the sentiment was pure Chloe. Then came the rumors. An old high school acquaintance mentioned that she'd run into Chloe, who had sadly recounted how I had taken advantage of our grandmother's failing health. The narrative she spun was ugly. that I had isolated Grace from the family to secure the inheritance. The final straw in this covert campaign was the surprise visit from the city health department. A stern-faced inspector arrived, citing an anonymous tip about unsanitary conditions in the cafe. My heart pounded with a mixture of fear and fury as he went over every inch of my small kitchen. Of course, he found nothing. We were immaculate, but the stress and humiliation of it lingered for days. I had no concrete proof, but I knew. I knew it was Chloe. It was then that I started a new file on my computer, password protected. I named it Insurance. I took screenshots of the reviews. I wrote down the date and details of the conversation with my high school friend. I filed away the health inspection report. I didn't know why I was doing it. Not really. It just felt like something a person with sense, but no sparkle would do. Then about a month before my 45th birthday, the olive branch appeared. It was a call from my mother, her voice syrupy sweet. "Ava, darling, we were just thinking it's been far too long. And with your big birthday coming up, we want to take you out. A proper celebration. Just us. To that new French place downtown, Le Miroir." I was immediately suspicious. My family didn't do proper celebrations for me. My birthdays were usually acknowledged with a belated text message. But a small, stupid part of me, the part that still craved the family in the photos, wanted to believe. "That sounds nice, Mom," I said, my voice betraying a wariness I couldn't hide. "Wonderful," she chirped. "Chloe is so excited. We'll make it a night to remember." She was right about that. Le Miroir was all polished dark wood, gilded mirrors, and hushed tones. It was Chloe's kind of place, not mine. She and my mother were already at the table, radiating a kind of triumphant glow. They showered me with compliments that felt hollow and rehearsed. "That color is wonderful on you, Ava. The store is looking so busy these days. You must be doing so well." We went through the motions of a pleasant dinner. The wine was expensive, the food exquisite. But under the surface, a tense energy coiled like a snake. I felt like an actor in a play where I was the only one who hadn't read the script. Finally, after the dessert plates were cleared, my father, who had been mostly silent, raised his wine glass. "A toast," he said, his voice imbued with a false gravitas. "To family, and to new beginnings." I clinked my glass against theirs, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. My mother dabbed her lips with her napkin and leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "Ava," she began, "your father and I have been doing some estate planning, finalizing things, and we wanted you to be the first to know." She paused for dramatic effect. "We've decided to leave everything, the house, the investments, all of it, to Chloe." The words hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the room. My ears roared. It wasn't a surprise, not really. It was the confirmation of a lifetime of being second best. But the cold public declaration of it, at a dinner supposedly in my honor, was a special kind of cruelty. Over $5 million, erased from my life with a single sentence. Before I could even process it, Chloe spoke, her voice oozing a practiced sympathy. "We just figured, Ava, since Grandma was so generous to you, it's only fair to make sure I'm secure." Then my mother delivered the final, fatal blow, the true purpose of the evening. "And speaking of fairness," she said, her smile never wavering, "we have a wonderful idea that will finally make the family whole again. We've had papers drawn up. We want you to sign over 49% of the story Nook to a new family trust. Chloe would be the perfect creative director, the public face of the business. She has the flair for it, Ava. You're wonderful with the books and the accounts, of course, but Chloe can make it famous." There it was. The entire ugly truth, laid bare on a white tablecloth between the breadcrumbs and water stains. They didn't just want me to be disinherited. They wanted me to fund my own replacement. They wanted me to do the work while Chloe collected the glory. They wanted to take the one thing Grace had given me, the one thing that was truly mine, and colonize it with their greed and dysfunction. A strange calm settled over me. It was the calm of a ship's captain who sees the iceberg and knows the time for turning is over. The time for impact has come. All the small hurts, the subtle slights, the lifetime of being overlooked, it all coalesced into a single point of cold, hard clarity. I carefully placed my cloth napkin on the table beside my plate. My hands, I was pleased to note, were perfectly steady. I looked from my mother's expectant face to my sister's smug one, to my father's cowardly, averted gaze. "Thank you," I said, my voice chillingly quiet but carrying across the table with absolute finality. "Thank you for making everything perfectly clear." I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping softly against the polished floor. "The story Nook," I continued, standing to my full height, "is not up for discussion. Not tonight. Not ever." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply turned and walked away, leaving them sitting there, stunned and silent, in a gilded room full of mirrors that reflected their own ugly ambition back at them. I didn't look back. For the first time in my life, I felt no need to. The door to Lil Miroir clicked shut behind me, and as I stepped out into the cool night air, I felt the exhilarating, terrifying rush of freedom. The freedom I felt that night was short-lived. 2 weeks later, a courier delivered a thick manila envelope to the bookstore. Inside, nestled amongst legal jargon and intimidating letterhead, was a civil complaint. They were suing me. My own mother and sister were suing me. The charges were a work of fiction, a grotesque distortion of the truth, elder manipulation, unjust enrichment. They claimed I had systematically isolated a vulnerable Grace, poisoning her against her loving family to fraudulently secure her primary asset. The lawsuit demanded not only the full, appraised value of the story Nook, but an additional $2 million in lost potential family earnings and punitive damages. They weren't just trying to take my inheritance. They were trying to ruin me, to bury me under a mountain of debt and disgrace. The lawsuit was a declaration of war, and they immediately launched a public relations offensive. The story they spun through the town's gossip channels was both vicious and effective. I was the greedy, manipulative spinster who had preyed on a sick old woman. They were the grieving family, too kind and trusting, who were now forced to seek justice. The effect was immediate and sickening. Old family friends who used to greet me warmly now crossed the street to avoid me. Business at the store slowed to a trickle. I'd catch customers whispering as they browsed the aisles, their glances a mixture of pity and contempt. The story Nook, my sanctuary, suddenly felt like a glass cage where I was the main exhibit. One bleak afternoon, sitting alone in the silent, empty store, I hit my rock bottom. It wasn't just the stress or the fear of financial ruin. It was a profound, existential crisis. I looked at my hands, the hands that had held my grandmother's, the hands that had stocked these shelves and served this community. I spent my whole life being the good daughter, I thought, a wave of despair washing over me. I sacrificed, I cared, I stayed. And for what? To be called a thief by my own mother? The foundation of my identity, the dutiful daughter, the responsible one. It all crumbled, leaving me hollow and adrift. For a fleeting, terrifying moment, I considered the unthinkable. Selling the store, giving them what they wanted just to make the pain stop. That's when I called Sophia Ruiz. Sophia was a lawyer whose card I'd kept from a local business association meeting. Her practice specialized in elder law. When I walked in her office, a bundle of nerves and legal papers, she listened to my entire story without interruption, her expression calm and unreadable. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "My own grandfather," she said, her voice quiet but intense, "was a kind, trusting man. A caring cousin convinced him to sign over his house. By the time we found out, it was too late. I don't let that happen to my clients, Ava." In that moment, she wasn't just a lawyer. She was an ally. A fire I thought had been extinguished in me flickered back to life. "They will attack Grace's character and her mental state," Sophia said, her focus now razor-sharp. "That will be the heart of their case. We need to build a fortress of truth around her. We need to find anything and everything that proves she was of sound mind, that she made this decision freely. Letters, notes, emails, photos with timestamps, medical records. Find everything." Her words gave me a mission, a direction out of the fog of despair. That weekend, I didn't go to the bookstore. I went to my apartment and began a methodical excavation of my grandmother's life. I pulled out old boxes filled with her belongings, the things my mother hadn't bothered to take. For 2 days, I sorted through a lifetime of memories, faded photographs, recipe cards, birthday card with her strong, clear signature. The work was emotionally grueling, but also clarifying. On Sunday evening, I was going through the contents of her antique writing desk, the one piece of furniture I had insisted on keeping. It was filled with old stationery and dried-up pens. Frustrated and exhausted, I was about to give up when my hand brushed against a loose piece of wood at the back of the main drawer. It moved. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pried at it gently, and a false panel slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a small, velvet pouch. My fingers trembled as I opened it. It contained a USB drive and a small, ornate key. I knew that key. It was for her safe deposit box, a box I never knew existed. The next morning, armed with the key and the death certificate, I stood before the steel door at the bank. The box was heavy. Inside, on top of a few stacks of old war bonds, were 2 items. The first was a thick, leather-bound journal. The second was a notarized letter from Grace's primary physician, dated 2 months before her death, attesting to her full and complete testamentary capacity. But the journal was the true treasure. It was Grace's diary from her final year. Page after page, in her own clear hand, she documented her days, her joy in my companionship, her lucid thoughts on books and politics, and her profound, heartbreaking disappointment in her daughter and other granddaughter. Eleanor and Chloe visited today, one entry read. They stayed for 10 minutes. Chloe spent the entire time on her phone. They asked about my investments. They didn't ask about my pain. It's a sad thing when your own child sees you only as a balance sheet. I had my fortress. The deposition was held in a soulless conference room. My mother and Chloe were there, dressed in somber, expensive clothes, a picture of aggrieved dignity. Chloe, looking confident and coached, began her testimony, her voice cracking with fake emotion as she described my controlling behavior. I watched her hand, the one resting on the table. She was twisting her silver ring, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood whenever she told a lie. Sophia let her speak. Then, with the calm precision of a surgeon, she began her cross-examination. She used flight records from Chloe's Instagram to prove she was in Bali during a week she claimed to be caring for Grace around the clock. She produced pharmacy records showing I was the only person who ever picked up Grace's prescriptions. With each question, another piece of Chloe's story crumbled. The ring on her finger twisted faster and faster. Her confident facade began to crack. Then, Sophia produced the journal. She had the family's lawyer read specific, dated entries aloud. The room grew deathly quiet. My mother's face went pale. Chloe stared at the table, her knuckles white. And finally, Sophia said, turning to the large monitor on the wall, "We have one last piece of testimony. From Grace Miller herself." She inserted the USB drive. My grandmother's face, frail but resolute, filled the screen. She looked directly into the camera. "If you are watching this," Grace's voice, clear and strong, filled the room. "It means that after my death, my daughter, Eleanor, and my granddaughter, Chloe, are likely trying to undo my final wish. So let me be perfectly clear for the record." She leaned forward slightly. "The story Nook is not an asset to be fought over. It is a legacy, and it is a legacy I am leaving to the only person who earned it, my granddaughter, Ava. She earned it with every hour she sat with me, every tear she wiped, every story she shared when the nights were long and I was afraid. She earned it not through manipulation, but through love. A love that, I am sorry to say, I did not always feel from the rest of my family." She looked away from the camera for a moment, and I saw a flicker of genuine pain in her eyes. My love for my family was never a transaction. But my legacy is not a prize for those who showed up only when it was convenient. This bookstore belongs to Ava. Period. And any attempt to take it from her is a betrayal of my memory and my will. The video ended. The screen went black. A profound, shattering silence filled the conference room. I looked at my mother and sister. Their faces were masks of disbelief, which quickly curdled into the pure, unmasked fury of the exposed. Their case hadn't just been defeated. It had been annihilated by a voice from the grave. The deposition ended in chaos. The family's lawyer, a man whose smug confidence had evaporated, hastily requested a recess that everyone knew was permanent. As we filed out of the room, my mother, her face a ghastly shade of white, lunged toward me in the sterile hallway. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in like claws. "How could you?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "How would you do this to your own family?" For a lifetime, a question like that from her would have sent me spiraling into guilt and self-doubt. I would have tried to explain, to justify, to apologize for a crime I didn't commit. But the woman who stood before her now was not the same woman who had walked into that room. I met her furious gaze. I didn't flinch. I didn't say a word. I simply and deliberately pulled my arm from her grasp, turned my back on her, and walked toward the elevators. My silence was the loudest, most definitive answer I had ever given her. The legal victory was swift and absolute. The judge dismissed the case with prejudice, meaning they could never bring the same suit again. In a scathing judicial comment, he called their lawsuit a frivolous and malicious attempt to harass the defendant and subvert the clear, documented wishes of the deceased. He ordered them to pay my entire legal fees. I didn't have to tell people I had one. The truth has a way of finding the light. My wonderful employee, Marcus, who had been a quiet pillar of support, told me he had organized a We Stand with the Story Nook Day on social media. That Saturday, the store was flooded with people. Customers came in not just to buy books, but to offer a handshake, a kind word, a story about how much the shop and my grandmother meant to them. It was an embrace from the community that healed parts of me I didn't know were still broken. The ripples of truth spread outward, crashing against the shores of my family's carefully constructed social world. A distant cousin called, stammering an apology for ever believing their lies. I later heard from another source that my parents had been asked to resign from the board of a prominent local charity, the board citing the public details of the lawsuit. Chloe's small-time brand sponsorships evaporated overnight, her influencer career imploding under the weight of her own treachery. The justice was quiet, but it was deeply, satisfyingly tangible. About a month later, long after the store had closed for the night, there was a frantic knocking at the front door. I peered through the glass. It was Chloe, alone, looking disheveled and broken. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by a crumpled sweatshirt. Her face was tear-streaked and pale. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door. She stumbled in, not with an apology, but with an accusation. "Are you happy now?" she sobbed, her voice raw. "You have everything, and I have nothing. My life is ruined. You ruined me." The old Ava would have felt a pang of guilt, but I just felt a profound sadness for her, for the person she had become. "I didn't ruin you, Chloe," I said, my voice calm and even. "I didn't do anything to you. You and Mom made choices. You made them out of greed and jealousy. I made my choices out of love and respect for Grandma. She gave me a gift, and I defended it. That's all. But what am I supposed to do now?" she wailed, looking around the bookstore as if seeing it for the first time. "I need your help." And there it was, the endless, bottomless pit of her need. I looked at her, my sister, and I knew this was the final test. "I wish you peace, Chloe. I truly do," I said, and I meant it. "But my life is no longer available for you to be a part of. The door to this bookstore and to my life is now closed to you." I held the door open. She stared at me, her mouth agape, finally understanding that the currency of guilt and obligation she had traded in her whole life was no longer valid with me. She walked out, a ghost disappearing into the night. I locked the door behind her, and for the first time, the click of the deadbolt sounded like music. A few weeks later, a check arrived from Sophia's office, the full reimbursement of my legal fees paid by my family. I sat at Grace's old desk, staring at it. It was blood money, in a way, the price of my freedom. I could have put in savings, taken a vacation, bought myself something shiny. Instead, I picked up the phone and called Sophia. "I have an idea," I said. 2 months later, we launched the Grace Project. Using the money from the settlement as seed funding, I established a foundation run out of the Story Nook to provide curated libraries and host reading programs for local nursing homes and assisted living facilities. I was turning their weapon, their money, into an act of radical kindness. I was building a legacy that truly honored the spirit of my grandmother. Tonight was our launch event. The bookstore is filled with light and laughter. Residents from 3 different homes are here, their faces alight as they browse the shelves, guided by young volunteers. Marcus is manning the espresso machine, a huge smile on his face. Sophia is here, chatting with a group of elderly women. This is my community. This is my family. My gaze drifts to the wall behind the counter, to the empty space where a single, obligatory family photograph once hung. I took it down weeks ago. I don't need a placeholder for something that was never really there. The space isn't a void. It's a clean slate, a possibility. They tried to sue me for my grandmother's legacy, but they never understood what that legacy truly was. It wasn't the building or the books. It was the permission to be myself, to build a life based on kindness and truth. And it makes me ask, what is the best way to answer those who try to rewrite your story? Is it to argue with them? Or is it to simply write a better chapter?